de nos pays, il y a un fait que je n'arrêterai pas justement d'évoquer. C'est que l'édition s'est trouvée au cœur des dynamiques pour l'indépendance des pays africains. Comment? 1947, on a eu le congrès de Manchester avec Nkrumah. 1947, ce fut la création de la maison d'édition sous ce qu'on appelle la double alliance entre les intellectuels africains et les intellectuels progressistes. Jean-Paul Sartre, Ballandier, etc. Alors, cette maison d'édition, en dépit des différences linguistiques, a su réunir pendant toute son histoire les deux grands congrès, congrès de Paris en 1956, congrès de Rome 1958, a pu réunir l'essentiel de l'intelligentsia depuis justement comment on les appelle, les gens de la diaspora, en passant par les anglophones, ceux qui parlent les pays de la langue portugaise. N'oublions pas que Neto, Amilcar Cabral, etc., ont créé aussi un mouvement intellectuel et une maison d'édition au Portugal, à Lisbonne. Ça veut dire que l'édition est un instrument d'émancipation des peuples. L'édition est un instrument de contrôle de notre pensée et d'autonomisation de notre pensée. C'est une question cruciale. Il faut en discuter parce qu'aujourd'hui, c'est vrai, il faut publier. Et l'édition ici se trouve confrontée à énormément de problèmes et de difficultés. Je ne parle pas des difficultés financières, on va y revenir tout à l'heure, mais aussi la concurrence que constitue l'Internet, les publications. On ne sait pas aussi quelle est la valeur de toutes ces publications, etc. Donc, il y a là des défis énormes et des défis extrêmement importants qui interpellent à la fois les éditeurs, les écrivains, mais aussi le public qui doit acheter et lire. Alors, ce panel est dédié à Henri Chakava. Et en regardant tout à l'heure qui était Henri Chakava, c'est il fut un très grand éditeur du Kenya qui est décédé en 2024. Et ce panel lui rend hommage pour son œuvre, son travail, ce qu'il a représenté. Alors, nous avons d'éminents intellectuels réunis ici et nous commençons par Intellectual Freedom and Publishing in Africa, Experience with Henri Chakava par Barack Muluka. Barack, comme Barack Obama.
C'est moi ça. Sorry. Hello Barack, c'est moi. Et merci beaucoup, Madame la Présidente. Je viens du Kenya et comme vous savez, là, nous ne parlons pas français, nous parlons seulement le Swahili. Et avec ça, notre langue maternelle. Donc, parce que vous ne comprenez pas le Swahili, je propose que peut-être je peux parler anglais, bien que je n'aime pas l'anglais bien. Ndugu zanguni, kina dada, kwa ume, mimi ni Barack na najishirikisha katika itikadi za itifaki ambazo zimeweza kuhifadhiwa hapa, na nina furaha ya kupata nafasi hii ya kuweza kukongamana nanyi. Oh, la traduction ne fait pas, donc je vais immédiatement en anglais. La traduction, ce ne fait pas. Donc, je vais parler en anglais. Mais si vous ne comprenez pas l'anglais, je ne suis pas sûr ce qui va passer. Il faut que je continue avec le Swahili. Oui, n'est-ce pas? On va traduire. Kwa hivyo acha niongee Kibepari, lugha ya Kibepari tu ya Kiingereza kwa sababu muda unazidi kuyoyoma na punde sipunde wataniambia niondoke. Kwa hivyo acha niongee Kiingereza. Nafikiri Waingereza wameweza kufanya mpango hata kwa kuhakikisha kwamba mitambo imekoma. So thank you very much, and I'm very pleased to really be here this afternoon. I had the privilege of working with Henry Chakaba from my youthful years for a period of about 20 years. I joined him at what was then Heinemann in 1987, 1 year after completing my postgraduate studies at the University of Nairobi. I was a very young editor, a novice in all respects of the appellation. And I sat at the feet of Henry Chakaba and learned from him. And this Henry Chakaba, whom we talk about, and we would like to construct a whole thematic session around, passed on last year in March. I think it's only right that I request all of us to just stand up for 1 minute in honor of the memory of Henry Chakaba. Okay, thank you. First, to reflect about this one individual who, in our view, as those who have been in that space of publishing for quite a while, correctly has been referred to in Kenya as the father of Kenyan publishing. And elsewhere in Africa, there are those who believe that he was the father of African publishing. We reflect about that within the context of the theme of liberation, from liberation to reconstruction. I'm going to speak ad libitum, which does not mean that I did not prepare for this session. Indeed, I prepared very adequately, and I have already given a very comprehensive paper to the organizers of this event, and I do not purpose to read it. If I should read it, I'll probably require about 1.5 hours, which I'm sure Madam President will not give me. Therefore, allow me to telescope the thoughts that are contained in that paper in a free range reflection exercise, just so that I also speak from the heart, because when you speak about someone like Henry Chakaba, you must speak from the heart. Henry Chakaba, those who have not known him, was the first African managing director of Heinemann Educational Books East Africa. And Heinemann was a British multinational publisher in Africa. It has since undergone a lot of transformation and morphing back in its place of birth. I do not know whether it's now not under Reed International or some other guys. But Henry Chakaba was the person who began the transformation of the Heinemann Group here in Africa, and which transformation went on to catch on elsewhere, including in the place of origin. He is credited with liberating Kenyan publishing from British multinationals, and indeed spreading his efforts across the region without taking on the imperialist cape that came with the British publishing in the region. Working closely together with others like Walter Goya, James Tumsime in Uganda, they were able to establish the East African Book Development Council. And from there, they were able to meet with other Africans from elsewhere. Paul Brickhill in Zimbabwe, Jane Kachavivi in Namibia, Ngandu from Cameroon, Victor Nwanko, and Egboje Higo, Chief Juke Backout of Nigeria, to establish the Africa Publishing Network. They were also able to come together to establish the African Books Collective, which is basically a distribution company domiciled in the United Kingdom and which is owned by African publishers. If you are a publisher and you do not know how to distribute your books across the world, just go online and find ABC, African Books Collective, and you will discover how to get in there. Now, these things did not happen easily. There was a lot of strife. And because soon they will tell me to stop by guillotine, let me begin with the conclusions. Conclusion number one is that the effort to liberate African publishing and give it its own voice requires vision, it requires confidence, it requires determination, and it requires focus. Two, that you will find, as we have heard here this morning, that the adversaries are both within and without. Three, that the liberation is therefore liberation from a variety of entities. The most obvious one is the state, but there are others. There are commercial interests, there are foreign interests, but we are also in a dilemma because these other interests that we talk about that we need to liberate ourselves from sometimes have also proven to be partners, and therefore, if I may borrow from that expression, which we did not like very much in the 1970s, but which is valid nonetheless, requires something called constructive engagement. So we need to liberate and engage. Henry Chakava, especially, was famous for publishing Ngugi wa Thiong'o. And the publishing of Ngugi wa Thiong'o is a metaphor for the effort to liberate and reconstruct. First, they were able to liberate African writing from foreign languages and to bring it into African languages. Began with Ngugi's play, which was titled Ngaika Ndenda, which was published in 1979, 2 years after Ngugi came from prison. And he was taken to prison in 1977 in December by the Jomo Kenyatta government, basically for liberating theater. The Kenya National Theater, as we know it, is not the building in Nairobi where plays are performed. It's the actual performance by the people of Kenya, and that theater, when it began, was essentially a European entity. They were able to liberate it and take it to their villages to workshop plays with ordinary villagers. And on account of that, the Kenyatta government detained Ngugi wa Thiong'o for 1 year. When he came out of prison, Ngaika Ndenda was published. And hot on the heels of Ngaika Ndenda was another book in Gikuyu titled Shaitani Mudharabaini, which is to say Devil on the Cross. And Devil on the Cross was shortly afterwards published in English, and Ngugi wa Thiong'o went to the United Kingdom to promote it because now we had moved the center. Where previously decisions to publish were taken in London, they were now being taken in Africa, and subsidiary rights were being given to Europeans. When he went to the UK to launch devil on the cross, he received word that the President Moi government in Nairobi was waiting for him to roll a red carpet at the airport, which meant that they were going to apprehend him and take him straight to detention. On account of that, Ngugi delayed his return to Nairobi, first for a day, then for a week, and eventually for 22 years. When he came back, what happened to him is well documented. It was a very harrowing experience, which you could find out. Je suis en train de finir, s'il vous plaît, donnez-moi en 2 minutes. Je vais conclure. Merci. Now, it is important that I point out that within this entire context, there has been the banning of performance of plays. There has been the barring of expression, which we have to fight for. A few weeks ago in Nairobi, Kenya, a play by a girls' school from Western Kenya was banned by the government of Kenya because it was said to be a political play. And the young girls were tear gassed, they were beaten up with the truncheons. So the struggle continues, and the struggle will require courage, it requires focus, it will require a very proper philosophical orientation. Je vous remercie beaucoup. Merci.
Merci vraiment, Barack. Ce que je retiens de votre est une lutte politique. Une lutte politique d'envergure. Moi, quand j'étais au lycée et qu'on étudiait les livres de Ngugi wa Thiong'o, c'était James Ngugi et le Bléjaïra. Après, il y a eu cette dimension et cette volonté de reconquérir son identité. Il est devenu Ngugi wa Thiong'o et c'est un ensemble d'écrivains aujourd'hui sur le continent qui donnent un statut aux langues nationales. Et c'est comme ça que je vois aussi le travail de Shakaba. Ngugi est très proche d'un de mes amis, grand écrivain, Boubacar Boris Diop, et il vient de préfacer son livre traduit en Swahili, tenez-vous bien. Personne ne lit le Swahili au Sénégal, mais il pense que c'est une lutte politique sur le Rwanda. Et c'est Ngugi wa Thiong'o qui l'a préfacé. Donc, nous devons être très attentifs à ce combat politique qui ne date pas d'aujourd'hui. Et merci à Shakaba. Et je crois que vous êtes son digne héritier et vous allez continuer le travail. Merci. Nous allons passer au second intervenant, Thaddeus Chisango, qui va nous parler, qui nous met au cœur justement de notre problématique. Dilemma of Publishing in Africa as Intellectual Freedom Issue. Merci. Vous avez la parole. 15 minutes maximum. J'étais très sensible à ce.
Hello all. I'm very happy to be here, and I'm very excited because I've never been amongst such a gathering of African scholars. So I'm very excited. So since I'm going to talk, my topic is going to be on the dilemmas of publishing in Africa as issues of intellectual freedom. And I thought first of talking about, the publication or publications we are going to produce from this gathering. What purpose is it going to serve? I think we have got a very big job, or somebody will have a very big job of synthesizing all that information so that, we sieve the finest substance, and then it will inform whether we will get intellectual freedom or not. And I also observed that as we were presenting, we are talking of intellectual freedom. That's our main goal, right? But then we are seeking intellectual freedom from what exactly? From who? And when we have had that intellectual freedom, how do we actually practice it? And I determined that we are fighting for intellectual freedom from neoliberalism. And it was a hot topic. I categorized it in my mind as a hot topic because people were talking very passionately about such an issue. People also talked about, there's one panel group which talked about gender issues. It's also a very hot topic, especially in university circles. Why, for example, in Africa, don't we have, you know, is there anything that prohibits naturally a woman from being a president of a country? This is one of the only is it the only African country that has got a woman president? Tanzania might be the one, huh? Namibia as well, but it's just the two since you know, the end of colonialism. It's like being a woman is a handicap, which is in Liberia has had a woman president as well, but there are very few in comparison to the natural ability of. And I don't see that as a hot topic because I saw that there was only one panel group that talked about managerialism, but I think I categorize it as a cold topic because it doesn't arouse the emotions of people, the passions of people, but I think it's the most direct threat in universities to our intellectual freedom. Like I've had 3 bosses, HODs in my department since I joined my university. 2 have been female, 1 has been male. And I've had uniformly bad experiences from all of them, regardless of the gender that they had. And I had somebody at Wits University, I was a postdoctoral fellow at Wits University. 5 years, can you imagine, after my PhD, somebody was requiring that I become their research assistant. And I refused flatly. It was a lady, she became very angry, and she was the reason why I got out of Wits. So I'm not trying to downplay gender issues, but I see, you know, in a university setting that managerialism is a more direct threat to our freedom. Once a person becomes a chairperson, somebody talked about, you know, students being very active and being very passionate about justice, but once they enter leadership positions, all of a sudden they change and they become monsters. Why does that happen? I think it's an issue that we ought to address. And I'm going to address now more closely the topic that is at my hand. So why should we publish as African scholars? We publish, otherwise we perish. Not perishing in the parochial sense that we talk of as academics, but as a continent as a whole. Imagine they say, I don't know whether it's true, that we only produce about 1% of global output in terms of research. I think it's a fake statistic. It's not actually true because what they are talking about is the output that is indexed by Scopus and Web of Science. But the majority of the research that we produce as Africans is not indexed in such journals. They are very difficult from our perspective. To anybody who publishes prolifically knows that you can take a year just to publish 1 paper, you know, in a Scopus indexed journal. So, but nevertheless, it's a red flag on our part that we ought to do something. We ought not to be complacent and have the victim mentality. We may have, Syria, I think, can manage to have their own Scopus indexed journal. I'm challenging them. I think we do have the capacity. We do have great minds, and I think they do have some resources, and I think it's very possible. But regardless, as somebody pointed out as well, we must not just publish because we want to publish in a Scopus indexed journal. It's parochial. We must publish because we have African problems, and we have African problems, we must seek African solutions. I think that's a better goal. Like, you know, if we synthesize information that we have produced in this forum, and we actually have, you know, intellectual freedom in the future, it's a better goal rather than just publishing articles because we want them to be recognized. So why do we need to publish? For our careers? That's the parochial sense in which we should publish. You know, I've often told people that there's no greatest teacher. Who is the greatest teacher in the world? If you are at university and you are very good at teaching, do you get promoted? No. But if you're a very good researcher, producing cutting-edge research, you know, Oxford may steal you from here. Makerere University, I hear, is one of the best universities in Africa. They may steal you, right? So for our careers, we need to publish. That's the parochial sense in why we need to publish, but we also need to publish as a tool of expression. And that's why we are fighting for intellectual freedom. If we don't have intellectual freedom, then we cannot freely express ourselves. But we need to express ourselves in a socially responsible manner. I think there is a presenter, Lucas Pez, I hope I pronounced his name correctly. He pointed out that we ought to have, we ought to have in our practice of intellectual freedom. Otherwise, you know, some of us become political activists. Even, you know, I think people like Kagame are very good people. I think Magufuli did well, relatively well for this country while he was alive. But sometimes we are very subjective in our criticisms, and then, you know, the government strips away that freedom that they would give in us. So we do have challenges in publishing, and they include censorship and political pressures. I think everybody knows about these issues. We have economic constraints, and, you know, I enjoyed that talk about neoliberalism. People are fighting against neoliberalism. I think that's the last point I'm going to talk about, because I think it's a very important point, because Zimbabwe has not just fought neoliberalism rhetorically, but, you know, under Mugabe, it was fought quite, you know, in terms of real action. That Malema type of a guy. But what did he produce now? He made us beggars. We are spread all over the world now, and we don't have freedom. The government itself has abandoned us, and the Western world, you know, doesn't like Zimbabwe as well. And we, the intellectuals, are left as orphans. So when we fight, you know, neoliberalism, you know, we must do it carefully as well, because, you know, we ought to know where our bread is buttered. Yeah, and I think that's my last point. I don't want to exceed the time that has been given to me. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup. Merci vraiment. À partir des préoccupations, s'il vous plaît, à partir des préoccupations de nos sociétés, Shishango a évoqué véritablement un point crucial, l'édition. Mais les défis de l'édition, comme on doit s'en rendre compte dans un pays où l'analphabétisme est encore une réalité, dans un pays où on écrit souvent dans des langues qui ne sont pas accessibles à la majorité de la population, le défi, vous l'avez évoqué tout à l'heure en filigrane. Alors, qu'est-ce qu'il faut faire par rapport à l'édition? Comment faire accéder ce savoir? Et un des gros problèmes aussi qu'il a évoqué et que nous rencontrons et que le connaisseur rencontre, c'est la dissémination des résultats de la recherche. Comment faire de telle sorte que la recherche puisse être accessible? Est-ce qu'il faut s'en tenir à l'édition simplement sur du papier, l'édition en ligne, l'édition, il faut enregistrer avec les nouvelles technologies? Donc, les défis sont énormes et il faudra, dans le débat, qu'on revienne là-dessus. Mais il a évoqué une question centrale qui est souvent le reflet des dictateurs ou c'est la censure. La censure est d'une gravité aujourd'hui. Le Sénégal, qui est un pays très libéral, ouvert, on a connu des censures. Par exemple, le livre d'El Awardi, Les derniers jours du prophète, une chercheure tunisienne, a été censurée au Sénégal. Tout récemment, un livre sur la Casamance par une chercheure chevérine française qui a travaillé sur la Casamance a été censuré par le simple fait d'avoir utilisé dans son titre le mot indépendant sans que le contenu soit lu. Et les historiens n'étaient pas d'accord là-dessus, mais ce livre est censuré. Alors, est-ce qu'il faut continuer à censurer et faire de telle sorte qu'on ne se limite quelques sujets. Je donne un exemple. Par exemple, moi, il y a des revues que j'aime beaucoup en France et que je faisais, quand j'y vais, je les achète. Mais je ne peux pas les commander au Sénégal parce que ces revues, on n'a pas le droit de les faire venir au Sénégal, dans les pays africains. Vous voyez? Donc, ce sont des questions fondamentales parce que le savoir aussi est aujourd'hui canalisé, organisé. Carlos, je reviens à vous et on ne peut pas dire ce qu'on a envie de dire. La censure fait partie aussi des préoccupations concernant la publication. Alors moi, quand j'étais étudiante, on avait un cours que nous aimions beaucoup sur le despotisme éclairé. Et un roi de Prusse qui s'appelait Maximilien Joseph. Voilà. C'est le nom que je n'arrive jamais à oublier. Alors, on va donner la parole à Maximilien Julius Schurla, qui va nous parler. Which academy? Il n'est pas là.
It's not there, so but
Ah, directly. OK. Ah, malheureusement, Maximilien n'est pas là. Alors, nous allons écouter Shadow, Stéphanie Kitchen et David Mills autour de. Ils vont nous parler de Conundrum of African Academic Publishing. Autonomy and freedom in the shadow of capital. Merci. Merci.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, organizers. Thank you, everyone who's been looking after this conference, all the cooks and drivers and helpers and volunteers. And thank you all for staying so long. This is the 15th paper you've listened to today. I think it's the last, okay? So please bear with us. The paper, of course, is on the Curator's website. Please read it. We're just going to talk a bit to a few highlights. And I'm going to share it with Stephanie. So the title has the word conundrum in it. It's a word used by the philosopher Judith Butler. And it's a conundrum that we started with at the beginning of the day around funding. She writes, we're dependent on a funded infrastructure to exercise our academic freedom. And yet, that academic freedom requires protection against the incursions that those funding sources into the domains of teaching, writing, and scholarship can do. So that's the conundrum. We're caught between dependence and independence. And then she says, and what happens when the infrastructural conditions become impossible? Now, she wasn't probably writing about American universities, but that's become increasingly clear that this is an issue not just for universities across the world, but it's for America as well. But it's at the core of our paper. Academic publishing is a practice of freedom that relies on institutions with the capacities and resource to protect this right. Article 9, Kampala Declaration, the right of the intellectual community to establish its own media and means of communication. But what happens when that infrastructure is repeatedly undermined financially? It's harder and harder for universities to sustain publishing expertise. Digital standards change, evolve, new technologies reinforce knowledge hierarchies. There's a global academic status system, all of which makes it much harder to do what Paul Zalaser insists. There's no substitute for a vigorous publishing industry in Africa for African scholars. So what we're going to do is we're going to do three different things. We're going to start by celebrating Henry Chikava and his struggles in the 1960s to stand up for endogenous publishing. Then we're going to go to the 80s and 90s to think about the rise of the donors when structural adjustment hit African universities so hard. And then finally, we're going to think a little bit about the present and how we cope with a global publishing system, its data analytics, and its use of our research metadata. So I've not got long, but Stephanie, you're on next. Thank you.
Hi everyone. So I knew Henry from early 2001. He was on the Council of Management of the African Books Collective, and I worked with him on and off for a long period. So what I'm going to say about Henry is very much informed by my personal experience. So I think, as we probably know, textbook publishing, colonial textbook publishing in Africa, we've heard about the Hachette case in the Francophone sphere, built profitable operations in the continent during the colonial period, and in fact expanded in the early post-colonial period. And this has cast a long shadow over African publishing. And the most significant publisher you probably heard of, we've talked about Ngugi, was of course Heinemann, publishing the African Writers series from 1962 to 1972. And in many ways, Kenya was a kind of text example of this colonial publishing. So for example, at independence, there was no national or privately owned publisher in the country at all. By the mid-70s, approximately 90 publishers were active in Kenya, mostly British. There were 10 local publishers, very much from Henry's writing. They were up against the multinationals and indeed the Kenyan government. So Henry Chikava, as we've already heard, founded East African Educational Publishers, indigenized from the British Heinemann. And Chinua Achebe described Chikava as one of the most pivotal indigenous publishers in Africa. I think his interventions can be summarized as strengthening publishing in Kenya, severing its dependence on the multinationals, and really laying the foundations of independence for African publishing. And Chikava, as you also may know, was an excellent student in literature and philosophy. His temporary job in his 20s, a mentorship from the British publisher Alan Hill, led him to take responsibility for this company at a young age. And the company became one of the largest publishing companies in the continent. He himself acknowledges the influences of Ngugi wa Thiong'o and also the Tanzanian publisher Walter Bugoya. And just a very quick word on Tanzania, as that's where we are. I mean, the publishing development in this period reflected the different political trajectory, although there were important convergences. The parastatal publishing house, Tanzania Publishing House, had a partnership of kinds with Macmillan, another British colonial first class struggles we talked about yesterday. But then TPH split from Macmillan. Walter Bugoya, who was working for TPH, set up Mkuki na Nyota, publishers in fact in the same building in the early 90s. But I think in general there was less commercial publishing in Tanzania than Kenya, which brings me to my second section, which is to talk about Chikava and what we're calling endogenous capitalism in Kenya. So I think Chikava's key goal was autonomy for the African publisher. It should be an institution responsible to itself, owned and controlled by Africans and situated in Africa. But he also acknowledged the limits on that autonomy in a capitalist situation, pointing out that model publishers wouldn't be free to do exactly what they like. They had boards, shareholders, and so on their backs. Chikava, and I think this is important in this discussion where we've heard so much about the charter and so on, Chikava accepted that publishing was a business. It needed to be viable, profit-making, and requiring of capital investment. He didn't actually wholly reject the place of foreign publishers, but very much advocated for the development of African publishing. He implemented commercial practices to enlarge the markets for African books, while strongly arguing for economic development, and warned that the risk of not doing these things was a bookless society. And in sum, he had identified that the main problem as the state's willingness to allow multinationals to operate freely in the market without restrictions. He talked a lot about the problems in independent publishing and establishers, and wrote a lot on this, and said that the local publisher was really too weak to have a voice between the multinational publishers and the state. I'm going very, very quickly to my second contribution, coming now into the 1990s. Post-structural adjustment, we've heard about that. We know about that. And what happened in the 1990s? Well, publishing was marked by a growth of donor interest in knowledge circulation, in access, in capacity building initiatives. We've heard about African Books Collective being founded in 1990. African Journals Online was founded in 1997, and APNet, the African Publishers Network, was founded in 1992. All these initiatives with donor funding. And I think these these projects still underwrite much of the fragile publishing infrastructure in the continent today. We're really quite keen to talk about research publishing and journals and so on. So I'd like to say a few things about African Journals Online. African Journals Online sort of came into being in the time of the internet. And there was a lot of optimism of the internet transforming publishing in the continent. But I think, you know, donors had a kind of trust in exogenous ideas about open access and much less focus on how journals were going to be sustained financially in the long term. There was a lot of work to secure cheap access to journals in the continent, perhaps at the expense of attention to financing endogenous publishing. And of course, the World Bank also emphasized access and book provision at the expense of endogenous publishing. Interestingly, Henry very much supported a, you know, don't give us a fish, teach us how to fish approach to the World Bank, which they didn't take up. He wanted a far-sighted policy to enable publishing industries to take off, but that didn't happen. And that's extremely important. And I need to go quickly, but I think we need to keep that in mind. I think a lot of people have talked about AJOL as being a successful model. And in many ways it is. It's the most significant platform for journals in the continent, but it hasn't succeeded in moving beyond dependency on donor funding. And as publishing technologies continue to evolve, in a sense, the pressures become greater. You know, there are more things that the journals need to do now than 25 years ago. And AJOL's been going 25 years and it's still not offering proper services to journals like proper open access business models, aggregation and indexation. So journals in this continent are very severely dependent on donor aid. They've survived admirably. They haven't all thrived. And, you know, talking to some of the journal editors on this continent, in this campus, you know, they do exist in a condition of fragility. So with hindsight, editorial control and autonomy were always important, as Chikava always understood.
Yes.
I'm not going to, you can go and read, I mean, many of you who publish will know exactly what's happening today in a global data economy around the pressures on you to publish, where to publish. So the final questions we have then for you are, you know, is this just continuation of global capitalism as normal? Has donor funding built autonomous publishing capacity in Africa, or has it sustained a dependency? Does the extroversion of the African Academy impact autonomy and the balance sheets of African journals? So yes, these are big questions, but Chikava shows us that there are many ways of getting journals out, and there are other stories of small commercial publishers like Chikava fighting against the odds. So I guess we would end by saying that African ownership of autonomous publishing infrastructure is still an important part of the jigsaw. Penda Bar calls this Afro-structuring. She calls it endogenous scholar-led publishing that needs support, recognition, and financing. And so therefore we celebrate Chikava and his role model, his combination of activism and pragmatism, and we end with 3 questions for you to consider now or in the conversations. What are the trade-offs between funding and autonomy? Is there a role for a commercial business model in publishing? And finally, can we ever escape from this conundrum of the relationship between funding and autonomy? Thank you all very much.
Merci. Merci David, merci Stéphanie. En tout cas, merci à ce panel de nous avoir fait découvrir Chakaba. On est là en présence d'un homme de dimension exceptionnelle. Et d'ailleurs, moi, je pense que ce panel sur l'édition doit déboucher sur une réflexion beaucoup plus grande, beaucoup plus importante, parce que il y a partout sur le continent, à un moment donné, des luttes pour l'autonomie de la pensée, des luttes pour l'autonomie, le contrôle du savoir et des chakayas Chakaba existe par-ci, par-là. Comment mettre en synergie tous ces développements dans différents pays? Je sais que dans les pays d'Afrique du Nord aussi, il y a un combat essentiel, un combat extrêmement important, que ce soit en Tunisie, au Maroc ou encore dans un pays comme l'Égypte. Alors, il nous faudra nous pencher, et ça, le CODESRIA a cette capacité, vu sa dimension continentale. Je suis en train de terminer la lecture d'un petit livre passionnant, tout petit mais passionnant, de Jérôme Garcin, sur justement les idées ou l'écriture pendant la période d'occupation, que l'on soit de gauche, de droite, antisémite ou pas, mais passionnant. Et ce que j'ai retenu à partir de cet ouvrage, c'est le rôle que la revue NRF, la nouvelle revue française, a joué pendant cette période, jusqu'à devenir aujourd'hui la grande maison d'édition qu'est Gallimard. Nous aussi, nous devons nous baser justement sur cette histoire intellectuelle consacrée à l'écriture pour voir comment ces idées ont impacté sur l'autonomie, l'indépendance, les changements, mais aussi nous sommes aujourd'hui appelés à aller vers un développement du continent. Alors, il y a là peut-être le lieu de faire sortir tous les chakabas et de montrer un exemple, parce que je suis persuadée que dans d'autres pays, on pourra trouver aussi d'autres exemples, comme Aline Diop l'a été pendant cette période charnière avant l'indépendance. Merci beaucoup et merci à vous tous. Donc, vous parlez des financements et l'essor justement de l'autonomie, les liens entre financement et autonomie. C'est une question cruciale aussi. Mais ce n'est pas parce qu'on nous finance qu'on va nous dicter des conditions pour qu'on ne puisse pas avoir notre autonomie en matière d'édition. Alors, ce fut un panel, malheureusement, qui est arrivé à la fin, mais un panel très, comme on dit en anglais, très challenging. Donc, vraiment, on va prendre quelques questions. Peut-être combien de temps disposons-nous pour quelques réactions? Parce que c'est la fin de la journée, tout le monde est fatigué, mais quand même, on peut écouter quelques grands esprits qui vont intervenir face à ce panel extrêmement intéressant. Le micro est là. Voilà.
Merci beaucoup pour vos interventions et j'interviens en français. J'ai vraiment apprécié toutes vos interventions. Je voulais réagir sur différents points. L'édition, nous, Africains ayant fait nos études postcoloniales, nous souffrons encore du syndrome de l'utilisation d'ouvrages qui étaient publiés là-bas pour que nous en consommions le contenu qui n'était pas nécessairement un contenu africain. Est venue la lutte et puis le transfert dans certains cas, hein, des maisons d'édition qui ont pris le pas au niveau du continent, parlant justement des publications scolaires. Et la question qui se pose, c'est de leur gouvernance aujourd'hui, parce que beaucoup existent, mais quand vous regardez de près la gouvernance de ces institutions, c'est vraiment truffé de n'importe quoi. Donc, comment est-ce qu'on s'assure également d'avoir une certaine consistance là-dessus? Dans les discussions aussi, je réagissant sur un autre point, nous parlons de liberté académique, mais ce serait également intéressant de voir le pendant pour ce qui est des médias, la liberté de la presse et tout ce qui va avec. Parce que ça ne ressort pas de nos discussions et c'est également le lieu d'une censure absolue à tous les niveaux. Donc, c'est intéressant à considérer. À l'UNESCO, nous avons promu ce qu'on appelle les capitales du livre et je le signale simplement pour que ça rentre dans les conversations. Et le dernier point que je voulais avoir, c'est celui du futur de l'édition. On parle aujourd'hui de nouvelles technologies, l'intelligence artificielle et tout ce qui va avec. C'est quoi notre regard sur le futur de la production des savoirs et l'influence aussi bien dans la production que dans la dissémination que les nouvelles technologies peuvent apporter et comment est-ce que par rapport à la liberté académique, on réagit à tout ça? Merci.
Merci beaucoup. Merci. Vous savez, quand Amadou Mahtar Mbow a été affecté à l'éducation de base en 1956, 57, 58, et puis parcourir les villages du Sénégal pour justement introduire l'éducation par l'image, il n'y avait pas de manuel, il n'y avait rien. Ablaye Bathily dit qu'eux, ils ont étudié l'histoire et la géographie à travers les polycopes, les polycopies. Nous sommes partis de rien et nous voilà où nous en sommes aujourd'hui. Je crois qu'on a créé des livres. Il y a même eu IPAM, Institut malgache, africain et malgache. Moi, ça, c'est la question que je pose. Est-ce qu'il est possible aujourd'hui d'avoir une édition qui va, je ne dis pas uniformiser parce que la diversité, elle est importante, mais où on aura à aller dans le sens du panafricanisme avec des manuels bien étudiés, bien ciblés. Au niveau africain, ça n'empêche pas qu'on ait d'autres types de manuels, mais au moins qu'on prenne en compte la dimension panafricaine avec une application dans les différents pays. Je crois que nous devrions y penser. C'est important parce que si nous voulons avancer de ce point de vue-là. Alors, est-ce qu'il y a d'autres intervenants? Oui, Jacques.
Merci beaucoup, cher Penda. Je ne sais pas si je suis hors sujet, hein, mais je voudrais évoquer le cas d'une maison d'édition dont la dynamique de production m'étonne aujourd'hui. C'est l'Harmattan. L'Harmattan, c'est une maison d'édition que tout le monde connaît, qui a fait un bon travail par le passé. Et puis, à un certain moment, cette maison a mis en place une politique de décentralisation, n'est-ce pas, de ces agences qu'on trouve aujourd'hui à Harmattan, Kinshasa, Harmattan, Cotonou, Harmattan, etc. Mais quand on lit la qualité des livres publiés aujourd'hui par cette maison d'édition, eh bien, il y a à manger et à boire. De manière générale, la qualité des textes publiés par l'Harmattan laisse à désirer. Si bien que finalement, on se demande si, quand on lit ce livre, si on est devant un livre qui a été lu par des pairs, ou est-ce que ce sont des livres que, vous savez, quelqu'un envoie un texte et puis il est publié. Finalement, on se demande, mais où va cette maison d'édition? Mais en évoquant cette problématique, je fais allusion à la question de la liberté académique parce que notre liberté académique, c'est celle de produire des connaissances qui sont objectives, des connaissances, n'est-ce pas, permettant de faire développer, n'est-ce pas, nos sociétés, développer nos sociétés. Mais quand on voit ce que publie l'Harmattan aujourd'hui, et cette dynamique s'étend de plus en plus à l'échelle planétaire, et c'est ça, voilà le danger. Et je me dis, Penda, peut-être que je peux réfléchir avec toi et avec les panélistes, est-ce que l'Harmattan est encore une maison d'édition qui promeut la liberté académique? Voilà ma question.
Merci beaucoup, Jacques. Ça, c'est une question qu'on se pose beaucoup. À Dakar, c'est mon ancien étudiant à qui je prêtais des livres tout le temps qui aujourd'hui dirige les éditions L'Harmattan. Mais est-ce que ces éditions L'Harmattan impliquées sur le continent sont-elles indépendantes de la maison mère qui se trouve en France ou retournent les capitaux en France? Ça, c'est une question qu'il faudra absolument qu'on se pose. Et les maisons d'édition, aujourd'hui, je le dis tout le temps, c'est que l'oralité a récupéré l'édition. Comment l'oralité a récupéré l'édition sur le continent quand quelqu'un publie un livre? Alors, les cérémonies de dédicace sont des cérémonies dignes des cours royales, etc. C'est-à-dire, on amène son griot, on amène etc. C'est-à-dire, il y a une sorte de récupération de l'édition par nos cultures orales. Tout ça, ce sont des questions qui méritent d'être posées. Et aujourd'hui, tout le monde se demande avec la frénésie, les publications, est-ce que les gens ont véritablement le temps de mûrir leurs intérêts? Voilà, on donne à Cissé. Après, on vous donne.
C'est dans le même sens que le propos de mon ami Jacques. Effectivement, l'Harmattan, il y a quelques années, Denis Mogens avait été interpellé sur la qualité des productions à l'Harmattan. Il a répondu que les maisons d'édition françaises sont inaccessibles aux Africains. Donc, lui, il indigénise le savoir en apportant l'édition aux Africains qui ne peuvent pas publier dans les revues, effectivement, françaises. Oui, ça pose toute la question de... Enfin, c'est compliqué. Ce qu'il dit est tellement vrai. Je me souviens très bien que lorsque je dirigeais Africa Zamani, des collègues me disaient on va être publié par Africa Zamani. Je disais toujours qu'Africa Zamani a un processus itératif qui est très long. Le commissariat, c'est au moins 1 ou 2 ans, une année minimum pour qu'un numéro d'Africa Zamani soit publié. Il me disait, bon, si c'est pour attendre 1 an, non, on préfère une revue ou un public 2 mois juste après pour pouvoir aller au CAMES. Alors, je ne pense pas que beaucoup d'auteurs francophones aient envie d'attendre que leur ouvrage fasse 2 ou 3 ans dans les bacs avant d'être publié. Or, la Harmattan offre cette rapidité-là de publication. Je pense que c'est ce qui fait son succès. Mais la question que Jacques pose est tellement pertinente. Et je prends la parole surtout pour demander, en fait, le CODESIA le fait déjà. Est-ce qu'il ne peut pas avoir la promotion d'une maison d'édition africaine sous l'égide du CODESIA qui est vraiment accessible à tous les chercheurs africains, de sorte qu'on puisse avoir une maison africaine qui récupère toutes ces productions-là qui se font, d'autant que ce que Penda dit est tellement vrai, les capitaux des maisons succursales africaines sont après rapatriés en France. Hein. Ça, je peux confirmer. Merci beaucoup.
Là, c'est une proposition, Goodwin. Qu'est-ce qu'on peut faire ensemble avec, par exemple, les presses universitaires dans différentes universités? Les presses universitaires de Dakar commencent à être redynamisées. Samedi dernier, on a présenté le livre de Latsukabe sur la jeunesse du quartier à Dakar. Il y a beaucoup de publications. Qu'est-ce qu'on peut faire ensemble? C'est-à-dire, le moment est venu peut-être de réunir nos forces, de voir comment booster tout ça pour sortir de la médiocrité. Parce qu'il faut éviter quand même dire que les Africains ne publient pas beaucoup, etc., et publier n'importe quoi, que personne ne lit d'ailleurs. Alors, il faudra peut-être aller dans une dynamique beaucoup plus critique. Je connais trop bien l'histoire d'Africa Zamani parce que nous avons eu à le diriger, moi et Rokhaya, sous la houlette du CODESRIA. Et quand je me souviens, Achille a publié, pour moi, c'était extraordinaire, ce beau colloque sur la biographie de Dieu. Alors, tous les anciens, les Tchernoba, ils étaient tous furieux en disant pourquoi Achille est en train de détourner la revue et faire publier n'importe quoi dans la revue. Donc, il y a là du travail. Je donne à Marema, après je vous donne. Et puis, on s'arrête, non? Voilà. Le CODESRIA, mais vous avez placé ce panel si important en fin de journée, c'est ça le problème. Voilà, Marema. Ah, il y en a qui lèvent là-bas. Voilà, on va vous écouter, Marema. Après, je donne à Michia. Et Fred et vous. Après, c'est terminé. Plus de...
Non, non. Mais
ils vont répondre, oui. On sait. Doucement,
je pense que si une maison d'édition comme Présence africaine avait évolué dans un sens qui permettait d'avoir des présences africaines où c'est effectivement la présence de l'Afrique dans la publication et dans les débats, avait suivi le cours que nous souhaitions, peut-être qu'on n'aurait pas ce problème avec l'Harmattan. La question simplement que moi je me pose, c'est qu'il y a presque une appropriation et une envie de publier différents types de choses. Vous avez entendu le débat à l'histoire générale du Sénégal sur la qualité de ce qui était publié et ce que aussi les marabouts réclamaient. Et je pense que les marabouts, les féodaux, les partisans de l'épopée, toutes ces personnes qui veulent s'exprimer à travers l'écrit doivent trouver des endroits où ils peuvent publier ce qui les intéresse. Parce que c'est une question aussi d'accessibilité de la culture. Maintenant, je pense que nous devons refuser la médiocrité. Et puis, moi, je vois quelque chose de très positif dans cette récupération des publications par l'espace oral. Moi, je n'ai rien publié encore pour faire ma cérémonie de dédicace, mais je te promets que j'amènerai le griot de mon village qui fera mon arbre généalogique et il pourra bien se reconnaître dans le type de choses que je lui proposerai. Est-ce que ce n'est pas une appropriation dans les termes et les modalités que nous voulons de quelque chose qu'on nous a considéré ne devoir trouver scientifique et accessible que quand ça vient d'une autre, de ce fameux universalisme.
Merci. Ce que dit Marema est vrai concernant Présence africaine. Mais comment Présence allait intervenir devant une concurrence Parce que l'édition, s'il y a un secteur en France que la France tient à contrôler, c'est bien l'édition. Elle contrôle nos mentalités, nos esprits, nos savoirs. Et c'est un secteur que la France, pour rien au monde, et Présence a rencontré énormément de difficultés. Moi, je chemine avec Présence, même bien avant la mort de Alune Diop. Et Madame Diop rencontre beaucoup de difficultés. Et l'Union africaine, les chefs d'État africains, bon, les premiers, Jean Senghor, etc., aidaient. Mais après, on n'aidait plus la maison d'édition. Et il y avait la concurrence partout. Et vous savez, la France aussi a ses hommes chez nous, partout en Afrique. Ça, c'est qui défendent les intérêts de la France et qui sont comme nous. Ça, c'est un problème. Non, on va terminer. On donne la parole. Et puis les deux derniers là-bas, les deux, Fred et l'autre. Parce que la question, elle est importante. Il faudra la reprendre peut-être dans une autre fois, une assemblée générale, je ne sais pas. Ouais.
Thank you very much. And I'm really happy that we are where we are now. And I just want to quickly make some links from the morning, which I think, as a way of asking you the question, what is the next stage? We talked about how Henry Chakava took this big giant revolution. So what is it for now? And I think the place we've come to of Orisha and what Penda said in terms of what's the oral form of it and how we are going. So I'm asking if you can help us link. I'm starting with Issa Shivji and this insistence on linking with popular struggles to ask who are we publishing and how are we publishing? And I really want to go back to the panel before. I really love that they took us into the epistemological challenges and the space of, feminist, womanist epistemologies that use oral forms. Yes. And I want to ask if you can help us think about how we think about publishing as written text. How can we complement that? And already people are doing podcasts. And Barak talked about how Ngugi was arrested, not for his theoretical writing, but for doing a play. So what is it that we need to do now so that we move beyond? I'm not saying we stop publishing in journals. I'm not saying we stop theoretical books. I'm saying, how do we take that into other spaces that link with other struggles and other ways of making knowledge, the epistemologies that we're talking about that are indigenous in the last panel. But thank you so much. This is a really great way to end the day.
Beaucoup, c'est vraiment intéressant ce que vous venez de dire. Et ça renvoie tout simplement à l'importance du thème et la personnalité. Fred, ensuite, monsieur, vous êtes? Non, on a deux derniers, puis on s'arrête. Sinon, le Code Esria va nous faire
Thank you
sortir
very
de la
much,
salle.
Penda.
Oui.
And thank you to all the speakers as well. I have a question for Barak and for David and Stephanie. I was intrigued by the fact that you used the word conundrum, and I thought that you would be looking at the unenviable, in fact, untenable position that most academics worldwide are placed in relation to trying to publish. What the global commercial publishers have done is to cotton on to something that all academics are desirous of, and that is to see their work in print. And what they've done with that desire that we have as academics, as scholars, is to take our labor for free and then publish it and then ensure that the universities or whoever else will have to buy back your own labor. So at each point in that production process, globally, they are accumulating enormous profits to such a degree that the CEOs of the big global commercial publishers are amongst the wealthiest in the world. And it's premised on the backs of academics and the free labor that academics give. Free labor, not only in writing the work, but also free labor in reviewing the work, which is an enormous amount of work. And that is what happens. That labor is offered free of charge because we are concerned about and committed to the entire scholarly project. But we are plugged into a level of private commercialization, which makes the thrust of what we're trying to accomplish here with the public good and so on very, very difficult to accomplish. In fact, impossible to accomplish. And I was just wondering whether you have any comments on how we might think about independent ways of countering this. Thank you.
Donnez à votre voisin là-bas. Voilà.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. First of all, I want to thank Codesria for this is a very important panel in the honor of Henry Chakava. The last time Henry came to the University of Dar es Salaam, he brought Ngugi during Ngugi's East African tour. And it was a wonderful day that Ngugi came. But I want to say that the importance of this panel is the fact that the culture of reading, particularly the culture of reading books, has gone very low, There is a joke here in Tanzania. They say that if you want to hide your money, you don't put your money under your pillow. You put your money inside a book. Nobody will steal it because nobody reads books. You know? So I think this is important that we are reading. We are talking about reading, particularly reading books. Our students here at the university think that by reading social media and the internet, they are reading. And they have no shelves nowadays. So I think this is important, and this tradition of renovating and starting again a culture of reading books should be encouraged. Thank you very much, Madam Chair.
Je donne la parole aux panélistes. Chaque panéliste aura 3 minutes. Et on conclut rapidement. Venez ici.
1 minute, ça ne va pas, mais on va essayer.
3, j'ai dit 3.
3. Bon. Thank you very much, everybody, for those very useful interventions. It's clear that we have opened the Pandora box, and Executive Secretary, you will need to perhaps organize a separate conference on publishing so that we can delve into these things. Let me start with the universities. Universities are places where knowledge is sought. The role of a university is to seek, find, process, package, and disseminate knowledge. Teaching is a subsidiary. Research and publishing is number one. Universities like Oxford or Cambridge became famous not because of teaching, but because of publishing. The University of Nairobi attempted to open a press, a publishing press, and it ended up publishing pre-primary school books, while the researchers there, the professors, have written lots of theses, dissertations, and they're gathering dust in the shelves of the universities. We have got to find out what to do there. The thing about our friends from the West, they are not necessarily bad people as such. That's why I talked about, and I think the theme is correct, liberation and reconstruction. In our experience at East African Educational Publishers, we were able to refigure, to re-engineer the relationship with the Western publishers, such that, for example, between Mukuki na Nyota, Fountain Publishers in Uganda, East African Educational Publishers in Nairobi, and James Curry in the United Kingdom, we were able to find collaborative efforts that address matters of cost, matters of content, and matters of cultural relevance. Then just 1 or 2 very quick ones, and I pass on to my colleagues here. The question of publishing and content is a very broad one. There isn't just one type of publishing. There is scholarly publishing, there is creative publishing, and there is publishing of books for children in schools. We have got to look at all those aspects very specifically. The question of the French, I think, with preponderant respect, is completely different. Je pense qu'il restait ici en Afrique, la France de l'autre mer. Et la France regardait le pays africain qui parle français comme la France de l'autre mer. So we will have to address that, and I think it has begun. It's being addressed. AI, finally, we have been thinking and talking about intellectual freedom. AI is taking away even that capacity to think. Now, if you want anything to be done, if you have an assignment, even at the university, you put your question in the chat box, et voilà. Baraka aimait penser, mais il va rester là. But after commending that we read Yuval Noah Harari's latest book titled Nexus, The History of Information Networks from Stone Age to AI. And it's going to tell you some very interesting things. Merci.
We acknowledge, obviously, there are major differences in the Francophone space, but I think nonetheless, the lesson from Henry Chikava's legacy really is to take back control, and all these debates about quality and Amateur, need to be addressed through taking control of your own intellectual production and your own publishing. I mean, oral literature, Henry published a groundbreaking series of oral literatures in Kenya, oral literature of the Luo. Perhaps you were involved in that, Barak. I'll say a few things about genres of publishing. I think we all respect all of them: academic, children's literature. Just earlier this week, we went to see Makuki Nyanyota, who are recording audiobooks, including of Swahili literature, really at the cutting edge of what publishing is doing globally. It was really lovely to see that, and then just a plug for them. Perhaps I'll leave David to answer about global commercial publishing.
Thanks. I'm left with the shadow of capital. I mean, where do we start? Sorry, we need a whole other day. Fred, I'm just going to link it all together with, if I can, the theme of time. Okay, time. Our time is so precious. We give time to each other through mentoring, but through reviewing. Obviously, editors are often giving their time. And then as we know, our time is exploited and commoditized and makes profits for other people. So the question then is, how do we hang on to a gift economy within the academy? Okay, the importance of gift giving. And there are lots of initiatives to try and think about taking back our journals. There's a whole movement of diamond open access. But the problem is, it's also about the time of us and our careers. We're in a hurry to publish. We need a paper or a book for our promotions. The big problem of time is our universities that are insisting on these promotion criteria that make these unrealistic demands on our time. And so no wonder then we are trapped within this culture that forces us to think wrongly about time. So in relation to your final point, universities can change these epistemological expectations on us if they start to think about the criteria by which we get promoted, by which we get supported, and they reward our time as reviewers, as editors, as mentors. Universities and university leaders have this responsibility. So that's what I would like to see. Thank you.
Merci. Je sais que les organisateurs ont le souci par rapport aux interprètes. Je dis deux choses pour conclure. En Belgique, à Mons, j'ai été invitée au Mindanao par la seule volonté d'un homme qui avait décidé de mettre tout ce qu'il avait et toute son énergie autour de la création d'un espace qui était à la fois un espace de dépôt des archives, lieu d'exposition, de bibliothèque, de lieux de conférences, etc. Le Mindanao, à mon avis, est l'un des instruments les plus importants pour la culture en Belgique. Je pense que quelqu'un comme Chakava mérite, d'après tout ce que j'ai écouté ce matin, un espace aussi important en Afrique que le Mindanao. Déjà, avec l'aide des autorités, ce qu'ils lèguent comme comment on appelle ça, comme héritage, tout cela. En tout cas, il faut l'organiser. Vous, les Kenyans, vous avez un défi à relever, c'est-à-dire essayer de perpétuer la mémoire de Chakaba de différentes manières. Et nous comptons sur vous et nous serons prêts à venir vous rendre visite et participer. Ça, c'est la première chose. La deuxième chose que je voudrais dire, c'est que je rêve d'un prix, d'un grand prix en Afrique pour la meilleure édition, le meilleur livre, le meilleur texte, le meilleur document. Et puis, Codesria, on vous a interpellé. N'oubliez pas aussi la question de la censure, surtout concernant les journaux. Sur le continent, on censure de plus en plus de journaux. Mais si quelqu'un comme Trump le fait, un pays qui était censé être la mère de la démocratie, alors là, je me dis, ils vont s'en donner à cœur joie. Les leaders africains qui ne sont pas toujours pour la liberté d'expression. Merci.
Merci beaucoup, Prof, and thanks to the panel. We are closing now, but just one or two remarks. The first remark is that the interpreters are missing one of the headsets. Please, if by any chance you found it in your bag or in your car, please bring it back to them tomorrow. From yesterday, yeah, so please. The second thing I want to raise is that the session is closed. Tomorrow is the parallel sessions, and I want to ask if the ES has some comments to do for the parallel sessions tomorrow. Thank you very much for the engaged discussion, and see you tomorrow.
No, thank you very much. So tomorrow we're going to go straight into parallel sessions. Our expectation is that we will be able to finish early enough. So there'll be a session here, there will be a session in Kuruma Hall, and there will be a session in the boardroom of the College of Social Science. There will be Codesria staff to indicate to you where you are going, and we'll also have Codesria staff and colleagues from the University of Dar es Salaam to guide the sessions from the different places. Only this room will have interpretation. Only this room will have interpretation. We are not able to do interpretation to the other rooms, but we've tried to organize the program in such a way that it will still work. So please come tomorrow, and we will go to the different places. I just want to make one point in relation to the panel that we have just concluded, that it is indeed our decision that we will have a full conference on publishing in Africa. So that is an outcome of this conference that we want to carry forward. Thank you very, very much. Please do not leave Caroline's cake, because it's out there and there is a tea provided for on our way out. Thank you very much, and have a good evening.